Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I want to review the new short trek called Children of Mars, which is taking place about 15 years before the events of the new Picard show. In the end of this short trek, we see Admiral Picard reacting to what happens on Mars, and that's the same kind of footage that we saw in the trailer for Picard, in which we see that he has some kind of PTSD flashback, seeing the attack on Mars, so he probably feels guilty about that for some reason. Maybe he feels that's somehow his fault and all of that. I guess we'll wait and see in the Picard show and maybe in the Countdown comics. But the only glimpse of Picard was only as a holographic news image on screen, and that's it. So we didn't even really see him. But this is supposed to be a direct tie-in to the new show. And the main reason this short trek made me very worried, and it's something I suspected will be the case, is that apparently they're sticking with the STD style of how everything looks, the special effects, and worst of all, the designs of everything are exactly the same as Star Trek Discovery, even though it's supposed to be 120 years later. So why the hell does everything look exactly like in the time of Discovery? All the shuttles, the force fields look and sound exactly like the ones in Star Trek Discovery and not like the ones in TNG and the other Star Trek shows. And whenever I reviewed any of the new trailers for the Picard show, I always said the worst part in those trailers were all the scenes of a new spaceship, because it always looked exactly like STD. And we saw the same exact shuttles in the background and all of that. So that's a huge problem. I complained a lot about the visual style of Discovery, especially in season 1 when everything was so dark and blue all the time, and all of that was really annoying and the camera was shaking. They improved it a little bit in season 2, maybe they listened to some of the criticism, so it was no longer as dark, it was not shaking as much as in season 1. They kind of toned down all those gimmicky special effects, but we still see all of that kind of stuff in this new short trek. Not as much, but it's still there. We still see a bunch of lens flares, the same kind of style. And worst of all, maybe, is the behavior of people. The older Star Trek shows, part of the reason they were so good, they were so fun, and they were such good escapism, and they had educational messages for kids and all of that, because they showed us an enlightened future in which humanity got better than it is today, and it's like showing us how things should be like. And yet in these new shows they kind of threw it all out the window. It's more like a dystopian future. It's all much darker, people are not enlightened. People are cursing all the time, they're bad toward each other, they don't care about animal rights and all of that. And whenever they do pretend to care about those kinds of things, it always feels forced and artificial, and it's done in a stupid way. And so a very key ingredient is missing from the new Star Trek. It doesn't have that uplifting feeling that the old Star Trek shows had. And you know, when I think back, Deep Space Nine was the first one to actually kind of start that approach of being more grey, not as bright as the previous shows. And it was a slight problem in Deep Space Nine, but Deep Space Nine was done so well, it was interesting, and they played around in a clever way with everything that came before, so it was as if they were challenging those ideas of an enlightened future. They were approaching it with an adult point of view and trying to play with it in a more realistic way. And they still kept some of those ideas. I mean, they didn't totally say it's not like that anymore, and they did try to preserve some of that, but also challenged it in a clever way. So it was much more gray area, it had much more kind of necessary evil, actions by the heroes and stuff like that, so it wasn't as bright and so optimistic and not so preachy as the older Trek shows, but it was still okay. It was still in that range of acceptability, in my opinion. And the Voyager was pretty much a mess. Like, they were contradicting themselves. One time they valued their values and ideals more than life itself, and other times they were willing to screw up the whole galaxy just for their own sake. And so Voyager was kind of very inconsistent and kind of silly. And then came Enterprise, in which also they went kind of the darker route, but that was okay because it was a prequel set 200 years before the other shows. So it was kind of more acceptable because it is closer to today's humanity, and so if they were cursing or acting in a much darker way, then that was okay because it's a prequel. It's before the humanity became what it was in TNG time. And it was even 100 years before TOS, and so that made it much more kind of acceptable. But Discovery has taken place just 10 years before TOS, and it's nothing like it in any way, not visually and not in the behavior of people, and so that's a huge problem. And one of my excuses for the different visual style and technology being much more advanced than it should be and so on, one of my excuses was I made a few videos on that. I said that the new timeline was created ever since Enterprise, actually even before that in First Contact, which led to Enterprise and the Temporal Cold War, and all of that led to a new timeline in which technology is more advanced. And I even said back then that if the new Picard show will be in that same kind of style, I will simply say that it's also in this new timeline, that maybe it is kind of a sequel to the old shows, but maybe all the events in the old shows kind of took place differently now because it's all in a new timeline, and that can explain why everything looks different and feels different. And I am very worried because I was so optimistic about the new Picard show, and now I'm not. Now I'm really worried, but I'm still glad they'll do it because Patrick Stewart will not live forever, and so maybe it's better than nothing. And worst case scenario, I will use the clips from the new show to make more parodies. I used to make parody edits and recuts, making everything in Star Trek look evil just as a joke and all of that. So if they do it in that kind of way, at least it will fit my parodies. At least it will make it easier for me to make parodies of the evil Picard and all of that. So that's the worst case scenario. Most likely it will be a mixed bag. Most likely I will like some elements of it. And we do have some clues of some interesting stuff in the Picard show. I'll get to that a bit later. But first let me just summarize the visual problems. So first of all, it just doesn't look pretty in my opinion. All these kinds of ship designs with those kind of sharp angles and all that stuff, it just doesn't look as good as the more sleek, aerodynamic designs of the older Star Trek shows, which this is supposed to be a sequel to. And even the shuttles, they apparently have a school bus that looks exactly like the Discovery shuttles. And it has those abrupt angles and all of that, and it just isn't pretty in my opinion compared to the TNG style. That just looks much better and it fits that optimistic approach. That's part of the reason that TNG was so fun even visually. Everything was pleasant and pretty and beautiful to look at, and it makes sense in that universe in which they have replicators and they can create anything they want. People don't really have to work anymore, so they work in jobs of creativity, so it made sense as well as being much more pleasant. And Discovery, I guess, wanted to look more realistic. They wanted all the ships to look like military navy ships and all of that. They talked about that in the behind the scenes even, that they wanted the ships to feel like an aircraft carrier or something like that. And that's another problem on its own, that they made everything look so militarized. And Starfleet, in TNG time at least, they always said that it's not supposed to be a military organization, its purpose is exploration, and yet in Discovery it's basically the Navy. And most of all, because of the giant time gap in between Discovery and this new show, at least 100 years passed, and yet they never updated these kinds of designs. It still looks exactly the same 100 years later. Now I know in the older Star Trek shows they also often reused all kinds of older ships from the time of the TOS movies, but it was probably done just to save money. But yet these new shows are so expensive, they have all these flashy special effects, and yet they cannot even make similar designs to the appropriate time frame. I have no problem if they change it a little bit or if they do something brand new, and yet they just recycle the stuff from Discovery, which is over 100 years old. So that's just lazy. That just shows me that they don't care and that they prefer the designs of Discovery and they don't even bother to update them. As for the holograms, which is something I complained about a lot in Discovery because holograms didn't yet exist in TOS, and yet everybody are using them all the time in Discovery, at least now in the era of Picard, at least now it makes sense for there to be holograms, so at least that part doesn't violate the old continuity as much as it was in Discovery. So I can kind of forgive that, but I still wouldn't want to see holograms everywhere all the time, so I hope they don't go that route. And it doesn't even look comfortable, like they have, instead of notebooks, instead of writing things down, they just write on the hologram in front of them, so that means you have to raise your hands all the time. Like, wouldn't your hands get tired like that? Isn't it easier to put your hands on the table and write on the table? Isn't it simply much more comfortable? And yet with these holograms they constantly have to put their hands up and to write as if on a wall and all of that. That's just not comfortable in my opinion. And I know I didn't even talk about the actual story, but there isn't much of a story. So we have these two girls who live alone, I guess, on Earth because their parents are on Mars, and they go to school on Earth, which also doesn't really make sense. Wouldn't Mars have a school for all the kids and that's it? So maybe they just wanted them to go on the school on Earth for some reason. In TNG time, even starships had schools in them, so why wouldn't Mars simply have a school for all the kids of the people who live on Mars? So why even send the kids to Earth? And let's say the Earth schools are better or something, but then they make such a big deal about the girl being angry about her father because he doesn't want to come to visit her, because he's busy at work on Mars. And I'm like thinking, isn't travel time just minutes in this time frame? Because in TNG time they physically showed us the ship moving from Saturn to Earth in something like 20 minutes. So from Mars to Earth it should be like 5 minutes even at impulse speed. And also they're supposed to have advanced transporters. Didn't the old Spock in the JJ movies who came from the future from around this time, didn't he say that Scotty invented a transwarp beaming technology? And I'm assuming that was the Scotty who was found in TNG and who kept living in the TNG era. And so that's when he invented this brand new technology. And even the younger Scotty in that movie said that he was already working on that he thought it's possible to beam something from a planet to another planet in the same system. So you would think that by the time of this show, this is the same future that we saw that old Spock come from. So wouldn't this technology be available? So shouldn't people be able to transport from Mars to Earth in seconds? So what's the big deal about her dad not being able to visit? So it doesn't even make any sense. So she gets angry about that, and that's why she bullies this other alien girl whose mom also works on Mars, and she has a long tongue, and they keep showing us that she's able to touch her own nose and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, like, if that's the way they are all the time, then wouldn't they get tired of this trick? Like, it's not like you just found out you have a very long tongue. You knew it all your life, so it was just to show off to us that they are aliens, that they have long tongues, and that they find it funny. That was kind of disgusting. And also, that part made me think, like, why are they showing that the mother is such a great mom, and the father is such a bad father? Like, is this yet another example of women being better than men? That's something they always do on Discovery. They always have to push in at least a little message like that men are worse than women. And so it kind of I find it kind of funny. I made compilations of that from Discovery, that they always have to insert something like that to do something to show that women are better than men. Alien girl's mother is on Mars, but yet they're still in great relationship. And the other girl, her father is on Mars, and they have bad relationship. She hates her dad because he doesn't want to come to visit her, even though he can just take a shuttle, which will take 5 minutes, or use transwarp beaming and be there in 5 seconds, and yet he cannot come to visit her. And then she bullies the alien girl. And so I kind of wonder if that was deliberate, that the father is the one who is the bad parent, and the mom is the good parent. Maybe it's a coincidence. So anyway, they're showing that these girls are bullying each other, and then they start fighting physically. They actually fist fight, and the other kids all watch, and some of them look as if they are entertained by that, and none of them try to stop them. And this is where I kind of started getting pissed off, because where is the enlightened humanity? Now, since these are kids and biological impulses and all of that, we can assume that there will always be some physical fights and all of that. So I'm not saying they can never do that, but first of all, these are not little kids, so I would think that by this age they would already be much more educated. And secondly, we see all the other kids also just watching and kind of being entertained, and none of them even try to stop them, so all the kids are like that. And even the teachers, they show kind of glimpses of the teachers, and it looks like the teachers of today. And so wouldn't the educational system be totally different and much better? We see stuff like the teacher is humiliating the kid because she looks at the drawing that she had, and then she shows it to the whole class to kind of humiliate the girl. So isn't that kind of a dark sarcasm in the classroom? And like that song, we don't need no education. So why do I have that kind of feeling in a Star Trek show? What the hell? Star Trek always showed us that everything got better, the educational system is much better, even little kids are behaving much better than the kids of today. But why now we have people bullying each other and fist fighting each other, and all the other kids watching, and the teachers being kind of annoying like the teachers of today? So I'm really getting pissed off with that. And also they show us that they have a locker room, and the locks on the doors of each locker are like the locks of today. So where the hell is all the advanced technology? How come they don't have any kind of computerized lock? Why the need for a mechanical lock which looks like from today? So all of it feels really lazy. So it's just like they filmed it in a real school and not try to make it look futuristic, except for all the holograms they put in later. And all the kids are wearing the exact same outfits. They wear these red jackets and the same exact shoes. Even their bags are exactly identical. They all have the same exact gray bag. It's a one-shoulder bag. And they all have exactly the same one. So are they not allowed to have some kind of variety, to have some kind of creativity? They don't have a choice. They have to wear the exact same bags that the school gives them. And so that feels kind of dystopian. It feels kind of creepy. I mean, it's a school. It's not a prison, right? And it's not Starfleet yet. So why are they all have to be so disciplined and they're not allowed to add some color to their bag at least. And so that's kind of strange. And the creepiest part in the school is that when they sit around in the lobby, there are giant screens everywhere and they have all kinds of one-word messages like achieve and grow, all kinds of one-word sentences on giant screens all over the place. So that feels very creepy. It reminds me of all kinds of movies about the dystopian future, like that movie They Live had those subliminal messages on all the signs, like obey or consume, all kinds of secret messages designed to brainwash people. And so this feels very Orwellian to have those giant screens everywhere. It's kind of brainwashing feeling, and so I don't know why they did that. That's kind of creepy, and that was also one of my complaints about Discovery, that the whole universe of Star Trek as they showed it feels like a dystopia and not an utopia. And you have that creepy Vulcan teacher walking around and he's scanning everyone and he's checking to see who's late and who's not, and he looks angry, and so all this school looks very creepy and not what I would imagine in the Star Trek universe. And you know, I always wanted to see kind of the civilian life in Star Trek society, but I didn't expect it to look like this. I didn't expect it to be more creepy than it is today. I expected it to be much more kind of open and much more pleasant environment, especially in the TNG era, because they kept saying how Earth is a paradise, how there are no problems anymore, how they have a perfect society, and yet now we see that it's all achieved because it's all dystopian, mind control, brainwashing, Orwellian society. So this is so wrong on so many levels. And also they always said that there is no money in the future, that basically everybody are rich, everybody lives the good life, and yet the father of that redhead girl can't even come home to visit his daughter, even though he's on a nearby planet on Mars. So shouldn't he just take a few minutes, even at impulse speeds, to arrive from Mars to Earth? So can't he just hop on a shuttle and take a break from his job for 1 hour to visit his daughter? So it makes no sense unless we say that the speeds we saw in the Star Trek shows of whenever they were going from planet to planet in the same system, that's only the big starships or VIP people on expensive shuttles, and the regular everyday people cannot actually go at these speeds. They have to take the slow shuttle, which takes hours or days to arrive, and not everybody can take the fast speed shuttle or be transported, beamed up, which also I think should exist. Cannot they build like a relay system for the transporter and to simply beam people from Mars to Earth in seconds? Also, the transwarp transporter is supposed to exist in this time frame, because remember, Spock came from this time of this short trek, the time of the supernova, came back in time and said that Scotty invented the transwarp beaming technology, which I guess the old Scotty did, the one we saw in TNG, who skipped ahead to the TNG time. So I assume he invented it in that time, and Spock knew about it when he went back in time. So this is supposed to exist now. So why are they not beaming people from planet to planet in the same system at least? Unless I guess it was classified. That's the usual excuse for everything. Every continuity problem is just because it was classified for no reason. Why not use it for civilians? But maybe it's just too expensive. I was about to say, you know, maybe only Starfleet officers can use transporters all the time, but the regular civilians are limited. They cannot do it every day. That's why we see the kids use the shuttle. And that's why the father is stuck on Mars. Maybe it's too expensive with the transporter credits. That's actually something that was mentioned in Deep Space Nine when Cisco said when he first went to the academy, he was homesick so much that he was beaming back home every night for dinner. And then Jake heard that and said, you must have used a month's worth of transporter credits, something like that. So that implies that it's limited. You cannot just use transporters all the time. You have a certain kind of allowance, a limited number, I guess depending on your job, of how many times you can transport around the planet. And from planet to planet, that's even more expensive in the credit system, I guess. And so that's the only way to explain all of these problems. So it's not like Picard told us in TNG that everybody are rich, that there are no material needs anymore. That was obviously total BS, because civilians apparently are not able to use transporters or fast shuttles to get from planet to planet. So the working class is kind of get screwed basically, and they live in tiny apartments. We also see the two girls live in identical apartments, which was also very strange. Why does the apartment look exactly the same on the inside? I guess maybe they live in the same building, but still, why wouldn't everybody decorate their apartment the way they want to? Don't they have a replicator technology? Can they design the inside of their apartment any way they want to? And so, once again, it feels dystopian. Also, from outside the window, apparently this is all in San Francisco, so that's also kind of strange. Why are all the schools in Star Trek are always only in San Francisco? But I guess maybe it's a fake view, maybe it's a holographic window, and maybe there is no real window. and it's just a tiny apartment. And even the shipyard itself looks exactly the same as the one we saw in season 2 of Discovery, and not the ones we saw from the TNG era. But maybe they need the old style shipyard to take care of the old style ships. I guess that's the way to explain it. So let me now talk about the actual story of this short track, if you can call it a story. It was more like a music video. I guess it was made by the MTV generation who like everything to be a music video. I personally don't like that kind of style. That's also one of the reasons, by the way, I hated the Stargate universe, the third Stargate show. It always did stuff like that, and I consider that filler. It was just annoying to me, in my opinion. So I personally don't like that kind of style of showing a story through some kind of music. Basically, this redhead girl is angry about her father because he cannot be bothered to come visit her because he doesn't have enough transport credits or whatever. Or maybe his job is so important that he cannot leave it even for a few minutes. He's working around the clock, multiple shifts at once, all of that. It's possible. You know, they said in the comics that they're building a giant fleet to evacuate the Romulans because of that supernova. That can also be used to explain why all the ships we see there are the old style ships from Discovery. Maybe they took all the old ships from mothballs and are refitting them, upgrading their engines so that they can be used to transport the Romulans to save them. And we know that those old Discovery ships, they had much more space inside them than any of the later ships for some reason. The old one seems to be much more spacious. So maybe the Federation decided to use all those old ships for that, and maybe that's why we see them. That's the only excuse I can come up with. So anyway, the dad is too busy to come visit Earth, and so the girl is annoyed at that. And she takes it out on that other alien girl whose mother is also on Mars, and so she's in a similar situation, but she's not angry at her mother for some reason. So anyway, so she takes it out on that alien chick, who then retaliates, and then it comes to blows in the end. They fight in the corridor, and all the other kids cheer them on apparently. And then they are both disciplined, and they have to sit and watch those screens with the one-word messages. So I really wonder how all of this would have been solved in the normal everyday life kind of situation. Instead, they suddenly show that there's an attack on Mars. Someone attacks the shipyards on Mars, and it looks like half of the surface of Mars is being blown up in this footage, and yet it's only 3,000 dead for some reason. So I found that also very strange. I guess they just wanted to push that 9/11 analogy to the max, and so they even had the exact same number of casualties as the people who died in 9/11, because they kind of presented that whole event as that kind of event, that everybody, including that Vulcan teacher, was absolutely shocked about what was happening. And about that Vulcan, some people suggested maybe he's not fully Vulcan, maybe he's half human, maybe he's a Romulan. Of course we can come up with excuses like that. The problem is, why did they do that in the first place? Why not simply have him be a different alien to avoid this problem, or simply to show him not reacting? Some people suggested it was deliberate. It was to show that that event was so shocking that even a Vulcan would react that way. So it was deliberate. Maybe. I think it was probably they just forgot that Vulcans are not supposed to be reacting emotionally. So in my opinion, they simply forgot about that. But of course we can come up with excuses. Maybe he's half human, maybe that's why he has that strange haircut, which most Vulcans wouldn't have. Maybe he's a Romulan, even though I doubt by this time frame, even if relationship with the Romulan Empire got much better since the Dominion War, would there really be Romulans living on Earth and teaching students so quickly? I still find it very fishy, so I don't really buy that. So anyway, these two girls watch the news, which is on a network called FNN, which I guess is a Federation News Network. So it's like CNN in space. We also have an image of Admiral Picard reacting to it. And I'm wondering, why didn't the president of the Federation or of Earth is reacting to this? Why only Picard, who is just an admiral, unless he directly was involved in something there, and then maybe it will make sense. I guess we'll wait and see in the Picard show how exactly they will explain what happened. Also, the subtitles of the news says that this was a synth attack. So synth is, I guess, synthetic. So this might mean those androids that we saw in the trailer for Picard. Apparently there's going to be an army of Data kind of androids. Maybe they were built by Starfleet and used as slaves, just like was predicted by Picard in the episode Measure of a Man. So maybe Starfleet finally did it. They built a whole bunch of Data kind of androids, and then they rebelled and attacked the shipyards for some reason. And this might be an interesting story. I always wanted to see more androids in Star Trek, so it might be good, but I'm feeling like it will just be a ripoff of Battlestar Galactica, the war with the Cylons, and maybe a little bit of a Blade Runner in there and stuff like that. So I'm just having that sense, because it's Alex Kurtzman producing, I have a feeling that this will just be a rip-off of other movies and other shows and not really original. So that's my fear. So anyway, so those two girls see the attack and now they're best friends suddenly. So their personal conflict was solved immediately simply because there's a bigger war outside. And again, I think it would have been better to see how they resolve the conflict in the normal everyday life kind of way. And not because suddenly there's war and suddenly that's why they're now best friends. So this is not really educational anyway. You can't really take anything from it. So where was the lesson? What is the lesson? So wait until a war starts and then you can become best friends with all your bullies or what? So it makes no educational message. There is no moral to the story here. So what's the story? So you shouldn't be bullies. So that's it. It has nothing really to do with that bigger plot of the attack on Mars. So it could have been really anything else and with showing people reacting. So it's totally two different stories that shouldn't be connected. So this whole short trek really feels kind of pointless. Unless if maybe in the Picard show we'll see an adult version of one of these characters or one of these girls. If we'll see her as an adult later, then maybe I will say, okay, this was nice to see that character as a young girl and what happened to her in the past. Maybe she lost her mom or dad on Mars and so she will have a personal vendetta against the android or something. If they use that for the actual plot in Picard, then maybe I'll say that this short trek had some meaning. But if not, then it's totally pointless. Because they could have simply shown this reaction of people in the actual Picard show. Whenever they show that flashback of the attack on Mars, they could have shown the reaction of people there. They didn't have to do this separate mini episode for that. But if it will serve as some kind of filler, if it will make us feel worse about that attack, if we'll say, oh no, we know all those people there, we know all those children with the parents on Mars, so maybe that attack will have some more emotional impact when we see it in the Picard show. So maybe this short trek won't be a total waste in the end. I will have to judge that together with the Picard show when it gets to that point. Also, all those events on Mars will be taking place in the past of that show, because it will be 15 years later when Picard is retired. And so in that sense, maybe it was good to do this separately, because whenever they show it in the show, it will be a flashback already. So it will be strange to do a flashback inside a flashback, or to show some unrelated characters, and so maybe it was a good idea to show something like this as a separate story. The only problem is that the main story of the short trek about the bullying and the conflict of these two girls is not really related in any way. So just because they saw the attack and suddenly they're best friends, there is no real lesson to take from this. We learn nothing about the human condition from this, and so that's another problem with it. And also in general, I miss the days when Star Trek was actually about exploration, about encountering some kind of interesting science fiction phenomenon, or an alien culture, or stuff like that. But it's been so long since we saw anything like that. It's all been about wars and conflicts and violence and explosions, and very little exploration of the unknown, which is Star Trek supposed to be, in my opinion. And the Picard show most likely will be mostly about member bearers and all of that, which might be fun. If it's done well, maybe I'll enjoy it. Just like I enjoyed The Mandalorian, which is full of member bearers, but it was done so well that it was fun. But it did suffer from a lack of originality. It didn't really bring anything that new to the table. And so my fears for Picard show is that if it will just be member bearers and just all this action stuff, androids attacking the Federation, Romulans and Borg drones attacking the Federation, and just a bunch of wars and explosions and action scenes, and not really exploring any kind of new science fiction idea, then I will say that it's not really Star Trek. Star Trek is about trekking into the unknown space and encountering new stuff, new and original and imaginative new things, new mysteries, and not just the politics of the inside of the Federation and the wars of the Federation with other powers. It can be interesting, it can be a fun show, but it won't really be a Star Trek show. What made Star Trek special was about exploration and science fiction, and exploring humanity, and exploring cultures, and a little bit of politics and all of that. And some action is good, of course, but it should also have those interesting things, which in my opinion the most interesting is exploring the science fiction elements. All kinds of new strange phenomena out in space, or strange cultures, all kinds of what-if scenarios, like encountering another culture which is like Earth, but it's totally different because something strange is happening there. And I personally love all the creepy stuff, like Twilight Zone kind of what-if situations, so I always enjoyed episodes like that. And it's been so long since we saw any of that. And it feels like they just gave up on it, and they just are not even trying, they don't care. And they are deliberately redesigning, reimagining everything visually, And even in the new Picard show, apparently, according to this short track, which will tie in directly to the Picard show, and yet everything looks like in Discovery, even though there's over a century in between. So it's either total laziness, or they're trying to save money on all the space models and all of that, or they simply don't realize there's a century in between and they think it's okay. Maybe the people who are working on it simply don't know the facts that they should know. That's really the best sign of total laziness or total incompetent people doing that. So that really makes me very pessimistic. If the same people will be making the Picard show, then I expect to see the same kind of mistakes, the same kind of nonsense, the same kind of lack of attention to detail, the same kind of continuity mistakes, and deliberate retcons, deliberate redesigns of stuff. I mean, if we see Worf in the new Picard show, for example, will he look like the old Worf, or will they redesign him to fit the new Klingons? And so I guess they just won't show Worf, they won't show the Klingons, I guess. So they created so many problems which now are unsolvable. It's impossible now. I mean, we can invent excuses, we can come up with all kinds of convoluted mental gymnastics to try to fix all the problems they made. Or maybe you can say it's all a new timeline ever since Enterprise and First Contact and all of that changed the timeline. Maybe that's why everything is so different. But then how can you make it a sequel to TNG? Are we supposed to believe that despite all these big changes, all the same events of TNG happened exactly the same way? So they still met Hugh, the Borg, Picard was assimilated, and then freed, the 7 of 9 just happened to be on Voyager. So all those little events that could have been vastly different somehow ended up being exactly the same, despite the fact that it's a new timeline. So it doesn't really make sense logically. The Picard show should have been a sequel to TNG, period. It should not have been tied to Discovery at all in any way. They even said before, that's why I was optimistic, they said that they're going to keep each new Star Trek show totally different in style and tone to the other shows. And so when I heard that, I was optimistic. I was thinking maybe they'll make the Picard show much closer to the style of TNG, with everything being pretty, the advanced humanity, everything being pleasant to the eye, and not in the style of Discovery. And yet now I see they're doing that in the exact same style of Discovery. Even the force fields in the school. I mean, that girl was late for her shuttle, and suddenly a force field showed up, looking exactly like the one in Discovery, the same sound effect and everything. And not like the force fields in TNG or in Voyager. So this tells me they will carry over this reboot kind of style to the Picard show. And I knew that already from the trailers. I saw the same Discovery shuttles in the background of Picard when he went to Starfleet, and we saw the same footage of the Golden Gate Bridge that we saw in Discovery, which doesn't fit how it looked like in TOS or TNG. They are sticking with the Discovery style. So this is very bad news in my opinion. This makes me very, very pessimistic. And worse than the visual stuff is all the dystopian feeling. The fact that everything feels so wrong, so unfitting to the Star Trek universe. When they said that humanity is supposed to be evolved, it's supposed to have solved its internal problems, it's supposed to be a better society, and yet apparently it's just like today, and even worse. It feels much more dystopian. And I'm betting in the Picard show also they will say that Starfleet itself is evil. I mean, if the enslaved androids would then rebel, that means they will throw out the window all those good arguments that Picard made in the episode The Measure of a Man when he was fighting for Data's rights. So I guess Starfleet later decided the Data type androids can't be slaves and they can be used for slave labor or whatever, and then they rebelled, and then maybe that was the reason that Picard left Starfleet, that Starfleet is basically evil now, the Federation is evil, and so that's a total destruction of that optimistic vision of Gene Roddenberry, in which humanity was supposed to be enlightened in the future. Now it all goes to the trash, and so I have a problem with that. And I don't think Star Trek should even be about any of those things. Star Trek is about exploring the unknown, exploring far space, meeting new alien cultures, new science fiction mysteries. That's what it should be mainly about. All the other stuff can be done once in a while. But now they totally gave up on the exploration, they totally gave up on any kind of new ideas, and they're just ripping off other movies and all of that. So I'm very pessimistic about the Picard show, but I hope I'm wrong. Maybe if it will be done very well, if it will be written cleverly, maybe I'll take my words back. Maybe I will be very happily wrong in my prediction. I will be very happy to be wrong. I will be very grateful if they surprise me and make a good show, and I hope they do. But I am very pessimistic, to be honest. So that's my thoughts about all of this for today. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comment section below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.